Hello, everyone, and welcome to session track B. First on the I'm Case Schuler. For just a brief introduction, since Lindsay introduced herself, I'm one of the other organizers of the conference. But first on the schedule here in track B is Intimate Worldbuilding, a Solarpunk poetry workshop, which is hosted by Luka Dowell. Luka, they, them host the Solarpunk Now podcast, an experiment in challenging capitalist realism and highlighting hopeful projects. They hold a BA in literature from UC Santa Cruz. Luka once worked as a street poet, has produced several chapbook collections, and is an award-winning slam poet. Currently, Luka is an independent scholar affiliated with the Institute for Social Ecology. And with that, I will pass it over to Luka and let them take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Luka. I've already been introduced, so I will skip that part, but I do want to do a couple tech things just to make sure we're all set. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so I'm going to start. Just going to need y'all to bear with me a moment and give me a thumbs up if things seem like they're working. So the first thing I'm going to do here is share the presentation. Okay, so here we go. This is the Solarpunk Poetry Workshop, the theme of which is intimate world building. Yeah, among other things, I'm the host of the Solarpunk Now podcast, and I'm really excited in exploring Solarpunk poetry, hopefully to guide and inspire you all to make more of it. And I'm going to start, as we often do, with a little description of Solarpunk as I see it. So everyone's got their own definition, but this one is mine. And for me, Solarpunk has three core elements. It has nature, which is probably the most easily understood. So this means things like stopping the climate crisis, restoring ecosystems. And then, beyond that point, we need to consider how to factor nature into our decision-making, not just as an externality, but as an actual central factor in our economy and society. The second element is technology. This is the obvious things like renewable energy, solar panels, but also advancements in science and medicine. So science and technology are continuing to develop, and these are emphasized as core values of our society, but they work in service of nature and in service of humanity rather than for corporate profit. And the third element, I think for me, is the most overlooked. This is humanity. It's maybe the hardest to visually represent in a Solarpunk artwork, but it's the long-term hard work of building movements and fighting for change, and ultimately the path towards a more free and egalitarian society. So we're confronting the really big issues like war and global inequality, and I feel like sometimes this gets overlooked or isn't given the credit that it's due. But it's important to see that this is not a hierarchy, it's a symbiosis. No one element is above any of the others, and they're all important. If you take one out, for me, it's not Solarpunk anymore. So we're going to start with a poem that I think exemplifies all three elements of the Solarpunk trifecta. This is Shilpa Kamat's My Favorite Place. It was published in Solarpunk magazine, and I'll read it for you now. You'll rest, they all warn, eyes bulging, when I say how I slipped my copper forearm into soil fresh with rain beneath the redwoods. I smile, move on. They'll never understand how the sun and the rust nourish, how the elements creep into my memory, bone to machine to slug pace decomposition. In the forest, I listen to birds, lean back against the ancient pines, walk 70 miles uphill at dusk to look at Venus. Watching bats swoop swiftly past me as I climb, aware, at times, of a cougar quietly watching me pass. Wondering if they see what I know, that I am part machine, but of the earth as well. So to me, I think these three aspects of Solarpunk are all present in the poem, and they're sort of reaching out for each other. They're seeking connection. It's very explicitly a Solarpunk poem, which is actually kind of a niche thing. There really isn't that much solarpunk poetry out there, which is part of the reason I put this workshop together. But because there aren't many poems out there that call themselves solarpunk explicitly, I have a couple ideas for why that might be. It might just be because poetry isn't as genre-driven as prose, or it could be that the poetry side of solarpunk literature is just a little less developed. So I think we should look for features rather than labels. A poem doesn't need to call itself solarpunk to be solarpunk. These features would be things like the nature, technology, humanity synthesis, a sense of hope or optimism towards the future, and a sense of world building. And an advantage, I think, that poetry has over other solarpunk forms is that it's basically a tool for empathy. It's a way to share and connect with other perspectives. So that can be either empathizing with someone, or it can be consciousness raising, like sharing experiences and relating them to each other. You get a sense from a poem of how it feels to be in the world, not just like what the world looks like or what happens in it, but how it feels to actually be a part of those events and to see it firsthand. Poems also focus very narrowly on the significance of language use, more so than other literature forms. So this is a chance to explore the role that power and colonization plays in language, a chance to reclaim or deconstruct harmful language use, and a chance to come up with new terms that reflect the change in the world and the new ways that people see the world. Finally, an important element of poetry is the sound. This is things like rhyme and meter, but even a free verse poem that doesn't have a formal rhyme or meter scheme still has sound as a central element of it. Words have a shape, and those shapes interplay. There's line length to consider, and a sense of like beat or rhythm. You can have a poem that feels very expansive and drawn out, or you can feel a poem just kind of like plodding along like a horse trotting. So sound is always important, and all poems have a rhythm to them, and that's always an aesthetic consideration for a poem that can actually add to its meaning when it's done well. So I want to dig into some poetic theory a little bit with an essay from Audre Lorde, Poetry is Not a Luxury. So Lorde is writing in the Black feminist context, and for her, poetry is not a luxury, it's a necessity, because it can actually be a source of revolutionary power. So this starts by respecting our feelings, developing an emotional awareness and language for it. She says, quote, "This is not idle fantasy, but the true meaning of it feels right to me. We can train ourselves to respect our feelings and to discipline or transpose them into a language that matches those feelings so they can be shared. And where that language does not yet exist, it is our poetry which helps to fashion it." So I see this as an example of poetry being used as like consciousness raising, and also like a self-awareness process that just sort of leads to a fuller understanding of your feelings and why you feel the way you do. And poetry gives name to the nameless. There's a power in being able to identify and name something. The ideas that are felt but can't be thought yet need some sort of bridge to help bring them out, and that bridge can be poetry. There's another interesting reversal in the essay where Lorde addresses the white European mode of living, which sees it as a problem to be solved. And her answer to that is that living is actually a situation to be experienced. So we go from I think, therefore I am, to the answer I feel, therefore I can be free. And finally, the final key piece here is that it's our dreams that point the way. And here's a quote that I think sums up the essay. I mean, you should read the whole thing. It's a fantastic essay, not very long, but this is a significant part of it for me. She says, quote, "Within structures defined by profit, by linear power, by institutional dehumanization, our feelings were not meant to survive. Kept around as unavoidable adjuncts or pleasant pastimes, feelings were meant to kneel to thought as we were meant to kneel to men. But women have survived as poets, and there are no new pains. We have felt them all already. We have hidden that fact in the same place where we have hidden our power. They lie in our dreams, and it is our dreams that point the way to freedom. They are made realizable through our poems that give us the strength and courage to see, to feel, to speak, and to dare. So to me, this essay is solarpunk as fuck. It's really the theory that I structured this whole workshop around. And among the arts, I think poetry is perhaps the best equipped to focus on that humanity part of the solarpunk trifecta. I have another poem example we're going to get into. The subject of this poem is Ayanna Stanley Jones. She was a young Black girl from Detroit who was 7 when a police officer shot her in the neck and killed her. So if that sounds too intense for you, just wanted to give a content warning up front. You can mute the workshop, just sort of like tune out for a bit. The background color of the slide will change when we're done reading that poem. So here we go. This is Ariel Marie, who actually has a great essay on Audre Lorde's essay, which is how I found it. And luckily for this one, we have a recording of the poet herself reading.
This is Ariel Marie reading Pantoum for Ayanna and not a single hashtag. Look, there go a Black girl, body still tethered to her head. There go a Black girl, shirt still dry, no river of marrow or tears following her up the block, no bile from her head. Can we call her into form? Not a river of marrow and small tears of sweaty fabric, but manna and honeysuckle. From her skull, no bile, but beatniks in bloom. Can we celebrate the child on this side of the grass? Her sweat fabric, honeyed and unmanned. The girl young, a fresh world of gardenia blooming. Can we celebrate the child on this side of the grass? Open the window and usher in a new God. A breeze, gardenia young. The girl, a world made fresh. In her hands, piano keys, sticks of cinnamon gum, a window into the new. God, an usher, opening a psalm, free to be the thing she was truly made of. Piano keys, in her hands, cinnamon sticks like guns in the wrong light. Never mind that. Today she lives. A thing to be freed, made of psalms and truly holy. The girl will turn flowers into wine, spills herself, no more wrong, and today she lives. Never mind the light offering summer halo. It is a myth that we die anyway. We too holy. No more spills, no more flowers. From wine, girl churns herself a will, rises from the concrete, her arms full of clove. Her mother's yard, a throne. Anyway, the myth is that we die. We too summer offering. Halos like birds on our shoulders. The girl, gardenia, and we planted her full of clove and her mother. She raises a throne from the concrete, a yard of arms. The girl, a god king. The girl, a map of good. The girl, a thing worth trending after all. Just look. About this poem. My sole motivation for the poem was this truth. Ayanna Stanley Jones should be alive.
So I chose this poem because while it's about a very tragic subject, you know, one moment in this ongoing legacy we have in our country of police brutality, it's at the same time a poem where dreams and hope are given a lot of power, where Ayanna gets to be seen and celebrated and healthy. It's essentially a poem about what should have happened. And the imagery in it is sensual and even pleasant. We get cinnamon and cloves and gardenias and fresh air. This, you know, contrast, this dream of what should have happened really shows us just how much there is to fight for. And ultimately, I think this poem is a passionate refusal to accept the wrongness of what happened, which speaks so perfectly to Audre Lorde's essay. And this leads me into the theme for today's workshop, which I'm calling Intimate Worldbuilding. I'm going to explain a little bit about what I mean by that. So All poetry is world building because it is the world seen through the speaker's eyes. The speaker is not the poet. I think this often gets conflated, but in literary criticism and in writing, these are distinct things. You do not have to write from your perspective. You do not have to write things as they actually happened. The speaker is a persona that you create and inhabit in the poem, and it can have any relation to you that you think will work with the poem. So even poems that are about the real world, quote unquote, show it in so many different ways. The emphasis is on the emotional dimensions of a world. It's really getting inside the speaker's head, and the world looks different to everybody. And of course, speculative poetry is especially focused on world building because this is a subgenre that is very explicitly imagining different pasts and futures and other worlds. And you'll often see like fantasy and sci-fi elements or unconventional language use and an exploration of new ways of being. So that's world building. And secondly, every poem has a sense of intimacy. You're up close to the speaker, you're maybe even inhabiting the same space that they are, and you're seeing the world through the lens of their experiences and their feelings. When you put these together, you get poems that show you what it's like to live in a world that's different than the one you're familiar with. It's the goal of our workshop today is going to be to convey that sense of intimacy in our world building. One more poem before we get started. This is David Barber's Recent Excavations in America. This was published in Starline, which is another magazine that explicitly publishes speculative poetry, so sci-fi, fantasy, also some horror. There's a lot of really great stuff in there. Highly recommend it. I'm going to read in just a second. All right. This is where they lived. Memories of their dwellings marked by baked brick and an outline of Euclid. Whether they were happy here, we cannot say. Traces of copper worming through the walls, thought to be a charm to ward off disillusionment. This we understand. Some fragments of vessels, fashioned lovingly from glass the color of rain, stained with a residue of vines, in those days drunk as proof of success, now extinct. A broken blade, with lettering in ancient script, stainless, had notions of purity and innocence. ST was shorthand for saint. Their cult spoke endlessly of sacrifice and blood, object of ritual. This silvered ghost they called a photograph, though whether it is the ocean, the smiling woman, or the coincidence it honors, we do not know. You wonder if she loved or was loved. Their lives have this effect, their brief, crowded lives. Many of us wept at the frail bubbles of glass, totems they hung in every room, not trusting the dark. We believed that words or the weight of a thing in our hands would be enough to make sense of these people and the hour and lost places of their passing. So I chose this poem because we see objects that we're generally familiar with in our modern lives, but they're unfamiliar to the speaker. The speaker is seeing the same things we interact with every day, the wiring in our walls, the light bulbs above our heads, but to them, these same objects are rendered in a totally different light. And it's a very close focus. We feel like we're in the same room or the house that the speaker is inside. We're going over the objects one by one, picking them up with them. And we learn how it feels to see these objects with a different emotional framework, with a framework that we don't have, we haven't thought about before. And that brings me to some suggestions on imagery and mood. So good imagery in a poem has a staying power. I think Starhawk actually touched on this a bit in her presentation. And the reason that good imagery sticks with you is because it's specific, it avoids abstraction, it's unique to the speaker of the poem, and it has a lasting significance that carries through the piece and is consistent with its tone. My number one tip here is to avoid cliches. Don't say the same thing that you've heard someone else say. You don't want to use the same comparisons or metaphors that you always see. So You don't want to talk about tears falling like rain or the sun smiling down on you. When you say something that someone already has in their mind as a cliche, it's going to make the poem feel less personal, and the images aren't going to stick with the reader as well. So a lot of times when we read a poem that we experience as a bad poem, what we're seeing is a poem that's full of cliches. So that's just my number one rule of thumb there. Just practice making your images specific and surprising, and really just like vivid and personal to you as a writer and what you're trying to convey. And secondly, mood matters. Mood is the emotional landscape of a poem. It gives these images significance. We don't want to know just what the speaker observes, but actually what it means to them and how it feels to see those things. So as an example, we can imagine a rose. A rose is just a rose. It's a sensory object, but there are so many ways of seeing it. Someone sees it and they think, oh, this is a sign that summer is on its way. Someone else sees it and they're reminded that the rose is going to wilt and everything dies in the end. Someone else thinks that, you know, it reminds them of another thing they saw recently. Or, you know, the gardener is like, oh, I forgot to prune these. But then someone else is like, well, you did such a good job. So there's all these different ways that the same, you know, visual or sensory experience can have a totally different mood and tone. And I think a strength of Solarpunk art is how vivid and how sensory it usually is. And I want to keep that in our poetry, but also add this sense of the emotional world that it inhabits. So you can maintain that sensory feeling and also give us a sense of what it feels like to be there. It's going to be different for every speaker, different for every poem. Lastly, before we get into it, poetry is for everyone. So if you have some like weird trauma from your high school English class, don't worry about it. There is not one correct way to interpret a metaphor or a symbol. You don't have to rhyme. You don't have to read Shakespeare or sound like Shakespeare. Those are all important things. Those are all culturally significant, but your poetry teacher made choices based on their own personal preferences and lesson plan. And everyone's tastes are different and everyone's tastes are valid. Secondly, this is a rough draft. You're not going to be required to share with the class, although I hope you will. And nothing you write down has to stay in the poem. Just write freely and revise later. This feeling of writer's block really often comes from perfectionism or feeling constrained by trying to write a good poem. So don't worry about any of that in a first draft. Really, the goal is to form connections in your mind and just like let them come to you freely, get them all on paper. It's really you're taking a trawling net through and just everything you come up with, get it written down. And don't let stereotypes constrain you. There's no one poetic voice. Poets choose all sorts of different forms and different tones to suit their needs and what they're trying to convey. And while style is important, and it's important to develop and refine your style, it doesn't have to look like anyone else's style. So that brings us to the writing section. Now is the time to open up a new Word document or get your pen and paper out or whatever writing form you choose. Some people do their phones. I wouldn't recommend that, but if that works for you, like the Notes app, it's already kind of formatted like a thin column of a poem. So whatever works for you. And the way this is going to work is I will be giving you a prompt. There are 3 prompts. It's maybe more like one prompt split into 3 sections. So they're all going to build on top of each other. The first 2 prompts are going to be a little shorter. And then the third one is going to be like, okay, go write your poem. I'm going to give you the most time for that one. So you're going to get the prompt. I'm going to explain it a little bit, and then I'm going to turn my camera off and turn my mic off. I would encourage everyone else to do the same. This will be a quiet writing period. I will check the chat. So if you have any questions, you can type them there or ask me individually. But I'm not going to answer them with audio. I'm just going to answer them in the chat so people don't get distracted. And when you hear the sound of my voice again, that'll be your cue to open up the window and get your next prompt. So I'll give everyone another moment to get ready because I actually managed my time well, surprisingly. We still have half an hour left for the actual writing. All right. And now we're gonna do the first prompt. And again, I will be in the chat answering questions if anything is confusing. So here we go. So the first question for you is, what is your dream? And I'm talking about this in line with the way Audre Lorde uses the term. So what do you feel guided towards when you go deep and trust your feelings? When you think about the future that you hope for, or how you wish the world is different, I want you to focus on one particular way, a particular thing that you wish wasn't the way it was, or something you hope to see. One change in the world, could be past, future, or present. And I'll give you a few minutes for that. All right, does anyone feel like they need more time? You should all be able to unmute or speak in the chat. If everyone feels good, we'll move ahead. I'll just give you a moment. Okay, sounds like we're good. So I'm gonna move on to the second portion of the prompt here. This one, I'm gonna give you a little more time for, because you're gonna do a little more of that harvesting process of getting ideas down on paper. So the next step is to picture a scene where your dream is being built. So for this, my best advice is to actually close your eyes and really try to visualize it. So you might imagine that you're a reporter, you're on the scene, and you're trying to gather details about it so you can explain it in vivid detail to people who are not there. We want, use your 5 senses, see who's around you, ask them questions, see what they're up to, look at the sky, what time of day is it, what season is it, what's the temperature outside, what's the weather. Really just, take some time to go into your head and visualize it, this just moment in a timeline, any moment that feels compelling, and jot down every little sensory detail you can think of. It could be like the feeling of the concrete under your feet, or maybe it's not concrete, it's like some loamy soil in a forest, or it's the water on a beach. I could just keep giving examples, but you get the idea. These are not, it's not so much a manifesto or the big ideas in the minds of the people who are there, but it's what they're experiencing in the moment, the concrete feelings and sensory details that they're being faced with. So I will give you probably more like somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes to do this part. I'll check in about 5 to 7 minutes to see how everyone's feeling, and then we'll move on. All right. Good luck. Okay, does anyone feel like they need more time? Just write in the chat, or if you raise your hand, I might see it, but it's better if you speak up. Okay, I'm gonna take that as everyone is good to move on. So now we're gonna move to the concluding prompt. This is the big one. I'm gonna give you about 25 minutes. This is going to be the bulk of writing the poem, using all of the sensory detail and all the imagery you've just conjured up. So the third prompt is, who has the most interesting story to tell? So again, you're like a reporter type figure standing around. Oops, that's my timer. You're standing in the scene. There's people around you. You're building the scene that is a moment in your dream. So now you decide, moving away from being a third-party observer, you're going to decide who has the most interesting story, the most interesting, reason for being there, or things that they're going through while they're there. And you're going to write the poem from their perspective. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be an animal or a plant, but pick something that you can empathize strongly with. You can go around and maybe like try a couple different speakers until you find the one that feels right. And you really want to get a sense of how it feels to be that speaker in that moment. So again, bring in more sensory detail, what they're seeing and hearing and feeling, but also what their mood is, what thoughts are occupying their mind while they're working, or whatever it is they're doing, if they're a plant. And the poem will just kind of come from them and be their story. So I'll give you until pretty much the end of the session, and then I'll come back in and give you some information about moving forward, revising, and feedback, and sharing your poetry with the other people in the group. All right, good luck. All right. Hello again, everybody. We've got just a couple minutes left in this session. So we're going to wrap up for now, but of course, take your time and keep writing. I just wanted to share that we will be posting these in the Discord server. There's a channel in there called Luka Poetry Share. It's under the speaker follow-up category. So whenever you feel like you have something that is ready to share, whether it's right now or after lunch or at the end of the day, I'd love to read it. We'd all love to read it, see what you came up with. I hope this has been inspiring. I've gotten a couple messages from people who have been very, very grateful for the inspiration, and I'm very grateful for you bringing that up. I'm glad that this has been a good workshop, and I'm gonna post in that Poetry Share channel just some tips for giving feedback. So posting our poems just to share will be part of it, but if you'd like feedback, and I would encourage everyone to read each other and give feedback. I think that can be really productive to help people on the path to revising, to make the poems even better. These are rough drafts again, so I hope everyone keeps working on them and produces something really polished out of it. And that is all I have to say. Thank you so much, all of you who attended, and keep writing Solarpunk poetry.
Thank you very much, Luka. This was excellent. I know that I did some writing. I hope that I'm really excited to see everyone else's poems too. This has been fantastic. At least speaking for myself.